Hello, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about the article that Debbie Hayton has written. It is online in the Daily Mail on the 7th of April 2022. Specifically, I want to talk about forced teaming within our movement. So what's the problem with this article, you may say, because plenty of people are saying that because they think, oh, this is fantastic. A person who describes themselves as trans is in the national press and they are supporting the right of women to a single-sex space. But in actual fact, there are subtleties here that it's easy to miss. So first and foremost, Debbie Hayton very correctly says that Boris Johnson, by speaking up and saying that biological males should not be allowed to compete in women's sports, parents should be involved when children are making life-changing decisions about medication, and that women-only space is sometimes required to be for women only, he's quite correct to say that that is sanity, and thank God for it. And you know, I think Labour have seriously underestimated the way that the majority of people in this country feel. So then Dr Hayton goes on to say some strange things for someone who purports to be variously gender critical or reality based, or however you want to describe it. Now, a kind of some of this may be editorial decision making and not actually to do with the author of the piece, so perhaps Dr Hayton will clarify. But there's a part of the article that first leapt out at me, was the bit where he says, well, I have a dog in this fight myself. 10 years ago, I transitioned from male to female. Now, as we know, there is no such thing as transitioning from male to female, or indeed from female to male, because male and female are categories relating to the sex class that is determined at the point of conception, in which no amount of wishing, cosmetic surgery or medication is ever going to change. So that in itself makes me a little bit suspicious. He goes on and he says, I already had 3 children and a wonderful wife. I am incredibly grateful that I still do, and that we all live harmoniously. I transitioned for psychological reasons. It was causing me terrible anguish to live as a male while hiding my true self. Now, you know, this is the inversion that goes on here, because the fact that he was able to produce the gametes to father 3 children and create a lifelong partnership with a woman in order to produce children, that's a huge gift. And knowing what we know from other media, we know that it hasn't been an easy journey for Dr Hayton's family. Now, Dr Hayton says it was causing him terrible anguish to live as a male while hiding his true self. But the thing is, he's still living as a male. He hasn't stopped living as a male. He's living as a male who has long hair and is taking exogenous hormonal medications, possibly has had surgery. That's his business. I'm not going to ask any questions, but as I understand it, he has no GRC, so his legal sex remains male. So when he says that he was hiding from his true self when living as a male, that's an inversion of reality, because what he's doing at the moment is hiding his true self in a cloak of cosmetic enhancements, the term trans woman. So it's a bit of an inversion there. He goes on, my mental health collapsed. It was a desperate time. Now, I'm no stranger to mental health issues and indeed worked in the mental health professions for a long time. And so I just want to say that anybody who is going through a desperate time has my sympathy. You know, it is remarkable how our own brains can tell us things that are so distressing. So I'm very, very glad to hear whenever anybody has got through the other side of mental health issues. So that's great. But he says, thankfully, after first transitioning in 2012 and undergoing gender reassignment surgery 4 years later, so that's 2016, I recovered. So is he saying that medical treatment with hormones and surgical operations are a treatment for a mental health issue? Because one of the things that is true is that the whole trans lobby has spent a lot of time constructing this idea that being trans is not a mental illness, and indeed have removed it from the Diagnostic Bible, the DSM. He goes on, women should not be forced to budge up and make room for biological males, which I would completely agree with. So thank you for saying that, Dr. Hayton. He continues, I wanted to be female for much of my life, but despite all the stages of my transitioning, I remain chromosomally, biologically male, and indeed male in every other way. I am happy with my life now, and also glad I was born male, or I would never have married the woman who remains my wife or had our 2 wonderful sons and a daughter. I'm sure he means to say my 3 wonderful children. It's just such a shame, isn't it, that the feelings of gender dysphoria are such that you can write a statement like that and yet structure your entire life to declare the inverse. Bizarre. So he says, across Britain, there are more than 100 trans women prisoners. Why not have a dedicated facility for them? In hospitals, trans women could be given a side room rather than being on a male or a female ward. So I want to talk specifically about hospitals here. Side rooms in hospitals are not in neutral spaces. They are part of single-sex accommodation, which has been the NHS provision for a long time. So we've talked about this in previous videos. Side rooms are part of single-sex provision, which includes like wards with, 8 perhaps people on the wards in little, cubicles or whatever. And then there are a couple of side rooms, there are some showers, there are some toilets, there are some desk space for the nurses and the ward managers, and then there might be a little room where the doctors keep the medical records. So, side rooms are not off reception to the main hospital reception. They are already on wards. They are side rooms for male or female people. They're not neutral spaces. So what is he saying here? Is he saying he wants access to a side room in a female ward, do you see? Or is he saying he wants access to a side room in a male ward? Because those are quite different requests, aren't they? Now, the other thing is that side rooms are allocated according to clinical need. And British people are very proud of our NHS. We're very proud of the fact that we have designed a health system that provides healthcare to people according to their need rather than their ability to pay. And, we tend to hold, that's almost like a national religion, the fact that we have the NHS. So it's really important to us to defend that principle. Now, if you're on a ward and you have people in various states of medical distress, perhaps coming to the end of life, perhaps been given very serious bad news. You may have lost a baby. You may have been given a terminal diagnosis. You may be preparing to meet your maker, which may be imminent. I mean, it may be happening in the next, 12 hours. Given the choice between somebody who has a clinical need for privacy and for dignity, perhaps they have a, particularly gruesome end in front of them. Do those people get priority, or does the person get priority who has declared this nebulous identity? Because those rooms are never empty. They are never empty. They are constantly occupied because there's huge demand on them. So first of all, I want to know whether Dr. Hayton is expecting to have a side room on a male ward or a female ward. And second of all, I want to know, does he expect to have a side room regardless of clinical need? Or is he declaring that the clinical need of trans people always outweighs other clinical needs? Because trans is not a disease, people keep telling us. So I have some questions about that, and it reflects this marvellous piece of writing by Dr. M, which, is one of those pieces of writing which I think is going to become central to our movement, because the ability to actually name the problem is a feminist imperative, and the idea that we have to go along with the things that people say because they make common cause with us in some regard has a specific name, and as Dr. M says, it derives from the gift of fear, and it's called forced teaming, and it's when someone makes an agreement with you in order to gain your reciprocity, so that you then support their claim, even if it's coming at your expense. And it's closely associated with other forms of narcissistic abuse, gaslighting, that kind of stuff. So we always have to be aware that forced teaming is possible, and specifically forced teaming is likely whenever we have men within the feminist movement arguing for whatever it is, because almost unconsciously they can't help but center themselves, because they've been brought up in a society where they've been told that's what they should do. So I'm not excusing them, I'm just saying that's why it is. So it's interesting that we talked a little bit on Twitter, and a few women, I'd like to mention Marjorie Hutchins at Leaky Like, who asked Dr. Hayton directly, in hospitals, trans women could be given a side room rather than being on a male or female ward. Single rooms are part of the NHS single-sex accommodation, along with bays, showers and toilets. Which ward are you demanding VIP treatment in, male or female? There is no answer coming to that question, but it is a good question. I hope that we do get a response to that. Other people weighed in. La Scapigliata said, hospital side rooms are the same inadequate alternative provision for trans AD people as disabled toilets. These scarce facilities should be accessed only based on clinical need, disability and severity of illness. Otherwise, another PC protected characteristic unfairly loses rights and provisions. Couldn't agree more. Sal Robbins tweets. She says, I worked as an RN for the NHS for 25 years. Hospital beds are like gold, and cubicles or single rooms are like diamonds. Unless there's a valid reason other than them being trans, they shouldn't be given a single occupancy room. Yep. So, as she does so frequently, Georgia X. Cross really kind of defined the terms of this conversation. She said, quoting, "In hospitals, trans women could be given a side room rather than being on a female or a male ward." She says side rooms are in short supply, used for patients in need, sometimes for dying in, not as preferential, private adjacent accommodation for identities. I couldn't agree more. Now, we go on. We go back to the original article. So we're now looking towards the end of the article where Dr. Hayton starts to talk about toilets. As for toilets, another unnecessary battleground, I use the unisex option whenever it's available. We need more of these, offering all users as much privacy as possible. Okay, I have thoughts about this too. Now, unisex facilities are all very well. And I do understand that there is a growing population, particularly of very young people, who feel that they should not have to use the facilities designated for other members of their sex class. What I'm not clear about there is Dr. Hayton talking about unisex facilities, as in they've got a picture on the door with a man and a woman and it's for both, or is he talking about accessible toilets? Because as a disabled person, let me tell you, I am not happy with the idea of sharing those facilities with people who are not yet disabled. Because most of us will become disabled before we die. And it's better than the alternative. So I have some thoughts about that. And so I tweeted, Hayton uses unisex facilities where they're available. Does he mean, and I used the icon for the disabled toilet, is Hayton disabled? If not, Hayton really shouldn't use the accessible facility. I wonder what facilities Hayton uses when faced with the stark reality of male and female options. And I go on to say, because somebody brings up a time that they say they saw Hayton using accessible facilities. And I say, not all disabilities are visible. And I want to reiterate, there are a huge number of people who've been through a genital reconfiguration type surgery who have an absolutely legitimate need to use the accessible facilities because they have had interventions that have resulted in problems such as incontinence, fistula, all manner of generally awful conditions to live with. And I would never want those people to feel they shouldn't be using the disabled facilities because they also happen to be trans. I'm not talking about those people. Those people absolutely should be using the accessible facilities. Anybody who has a life-limiting condition should be using those facilities. But what I'm saying is that it is not okay if you are not disabled to use the facilities that are set aside for disabled people. And in fact, when people make the call that they want more unisex facilities, that is not what I want. What I want is for us to redesign more of our accessible facilities to become changing places toilets, because there are around 250,000 people in the country who are on a urinary leash because they have no access to the public space, because they have to use an adult-sized changing facility. Children who've grown far, far too big for a baby changing table need to be changed. Disabled adults need access to a full-sized facility in case they need to be changed and cleaned. And without that, both them and their families are actually restricted from accessing the public space. Now, changing places toilets do take a little bit more space up than your average accessible provision. And that increase in the amount of space is the kind of space that otherwise could be used to create a unisex toilet. So when people say they want more unisex provision, my challenge is, are you asking us to build more stalls for men and women to use who are able-bodied and able to use the facilities that are already in existence? Because there are a whole lot of people that are not able to go out of the house, that have to plan their family outings around the provision of changing places toilets, of which there are like 1,400 across the whole of the UK. That's an awful lot of people, and it is shameful that they are still fighting for their rights. As a disabled person, I will advocate for them all day long. I'm very fortunate that I am not in the position where I have to have access to those facilities. I don't need a hoist to get on and off the toilet. I don't need a hoist. I don't need to be changed. But, you know, there are a lot of people who do. And these people need consideration. It is not okay for perfectly able-bodied people to ball in and say, I need to be prioritised across terminally ill people, across people who've just been told that their baby has died, across people that need to be changed and washed on a toilet floor, or else they have to stay at home. I should have side rooms in a ward that isn't mine. Throwing safeguarding out of the window. Because the whole point of those single-sex spaces is that there's a safeguard. That ward gets locked. We know it's all female patients and staff. If it's not all female patients, it's not a single-sex space. Female patients that are Muslim can't remove their hijabs because it's not a single-sex space on that ward. So that's where I'm at. Excuse my rant, but it's important. So thanks for listening to me rant a little bit. I think it's really important that we are aware that while it's great that so many people are now advocating for reality to guide so many more of our decisions, whilst I'm absolutely a supporter of anybody finding their voice to speak up about what they want, and of course everybody should be free to lobby their political representatives, I want us to be aware of forced teaming when somebody is advocating for their own ends by pretending to be advocating for somebody else's ends. And I think what frequently happens in this space is that we are so grateful for crumbs from the table that we forget that we're actually entitled to half the pie. So thanks for listening to me. Do ask questions if you've got questions about changing places toilets or about, you know, disabled access to toilets. I'll drop some links in the description box to the particular UK context. I know it's very different elsewhere. Yeah, let's keep this conversation going. Stay alert. We do not want to replicate the forced teaming that happened with LGBT and Q in the past. So I'll see you again soon. Take good care.